Welcome back to Vintage Camera Digest. Today we're going to take a look at two of the most popular medium format SLRs to ever find their way into a studio. The Mamiya RB67, which began its run in 1970, and the RZ67, which was released in 1982. So stick around and find out why these designs were real game changers. So let's start with the RB67, and to get a sense of its importance, we need to talk a little bit about the 6x7 format, or 2 1/4 by 2 3/4, as you might see on some older cameras. The 6x7 format is often called the ideal format. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, to answer that, let's take a look at the standard print sizes that we have. Some of the longest standing print sizes then, and now too, are based on a width to height ratio of 4:5. I know there are some places in the world that will differ on this, but in the US, the 8x10 inch photo is almost the gold standard of enlargement sizes. Not too big, not too small, and fits perfectly in photo albums, and it's based on that 4:5 ratio. Now what happens if you're shooting 6x6 square format? Well, that's a 1:1 ratio and obviously can't be printed as an 8x10 without significant cropping. So let's take a look at that. Here we have a representation of an 8x10 print and a 4x5 print, which are, of course, a 4:5 ratio. We can prove they're the same ratio by running a diagonal from one corner to the other. The corners match up in both the 8x10 and the 4x5. So let's take the 4x5 print then and compare it with other formats. If we compare it with a 6x6 centimeter square negative, the diagonal doesn't align with the corners anymore. So in order to print the square negative as a 4x5 or an 8x10 print, we're going to have to crop out this much of the negative. And what's one major reason for shooting medium format? A bigger negative. But when printed to the 4x5 ratio standard, we're not able to actually use the full negative. But let's look at what happens if we compare the 4:5 ratio with a 6x7 centimeter negative. It's still not perfect, but it utilizes much more negative area and requires minimal cropping. And if you're like me, you like to compose the image in camera to the best of your ability. Use the entire frame. So I don't want to have to crop out big chunks of my composition to fit a preset print size. Luckily, today we have a lot more options for print size. But what if we want to frame our work? Well, we're back to the same problem. What 6x7 centimeter ideal format negatives do, though, is minimize the cropping necessary when making some standard enlargements. Now, you may have noticed I didn't mention 5x7 prints. Well, that's an entirely different rabbit hole. 5x7s and 11x14s are sort of oddball sizes that don't really match any other ratios. But I'm not going there because this video isn't about what frame sizes you can get at your nearest Dollar General. It's about these magnificent machines. So now that I've illustrated the benefit of a 6x7 negative, let's talk briefly about the cameras that shot in that format. And briefly is all it's going to take because relative to other formats, there just haven't been that many. And if we want to talk about SLRs that shoot 6x7, well, that number drops to 4. And here are two of them. The Pentax 6x7 of 1969 was the first SLR to utilize the 6x7 format. And if you're interested in learning more about that camera, I'll put a link to the video I did on it at the end of this one. But if you're using a rectangular format, such as 6x7, you'll need to be able to shoot it vertically as well as horizontally. On a 35mm SLR, you just rotate the camera to vertical, and the Pentax 6x7 is designed like a giant 35mm, so that's how you would accomplish that with that camera. But that camera is big, and while the method of turning the camera works, it is a bit of a handful to do. But in 1970, Mamiya gave us their answer to the 6x7 problem, the RB67. And RB stands for revolving back, which means that in order to change between horizontal and vertical compositions, only the film back was required to move. This feature is sort of borrowed from large format cameras because besides a few press cameras, they usually have vertical and horizontal shooting in a similar way. You just rotate the back. And one major benefit of this, in my opinion, was that you could use the standard waist level finder for all your shooting. Now, you could get a waist level finder for the Pentax 6x7, but it only really works in horizontal mode. The same thing goes with the Bronica GS1, which is the last of the 4 SLRs that shoot 6x7. In order to shoot vertically, you'd really need to add an eye-level prism and probably a right-hand grip to make that any fun. But with the RB67, you could just set it on the tripod and shoot horizontally and vertically all day long without having to move it, which is good because this thing is a beast. And yeah, you can use it handheld, but this camera was designed with studio use in mind, and it solved a couple of studio-centric problems. The first was being able to use the 6x7 ideal format in an SLR form. Selling 8x10 prints to your clients would be a studio's bread and butter, so to speak. And you could make use of the entire negative to do that. You wouldn't have to make significant crops as you would if you were shooting 6x6 square. A second problem it solved was one that the Pentax 6x7 didn't, and this comes down to shutter design and implementation. The Pentax, as great a camera as it is, has a maximum flash synchronization speed of 1/30th of a second. This is relatively slow and is due to the Pentax using a focal plane shutter. Mamiya addressed this by using leaf shutters in the lenses, which can sync with flash at any of the marked speeds. So it was quite flexible in the studio flash setting. So the combination of these two things made this camera different from all the others at the time. And here's a side note that sort of backs up the impact it had on studios. I have a friend whose father was a professional studio photographer back when this thing came out. His father ordered one, and he said he can remember the glorious day the RB arrived because it was such a game changer to his dad's studio business. My friend grew up to become a dentist, but always understood and appreciated what this particular camera did to help his father's studio be more successful. Now, we were talking about the lenses with their own shutters. These are fully mechanical Seiko shutters, so the basic camera requires no battery to operate. And the camera itself went through several upgrades and revisions during its decades-long production. The first revision was in 1974 and was called the RB67 Pro S. There were some minor improvements to the waist level finder and film backs, and this version is probably the most common one out there because it was produced until 1990 when the RB67 Pro SD was released. And with this camera, Mamiya offered the option of using a 6x8 centimeter back in addition to the usual 6x7. This meant that the lens mount needed to be enlarged a bit to accommodate lenses that produced a slightly larger image circle, and it also required some new lenses. But you could still use the early lenses by means of an adapter, so it didn't make everything obsolete, because photographers really hate that. Now there's one more version out there, the RB67 Pro GL. It was released in 1981, and the differences between it and the Pro S are strictly cosmetic. The GL used gold metal instead of chrome and brown leatherette covering instead of black. Otherwise, it's no different. It's just sort of a special edition kind of thing. The lenses that are available for the RB67 system cover focal lengths from 37mm fisheye to 500mm telephoto and exist in 4 generations. The original single-coated set released in 1970 with the RB67 Pro, the multi-coated C lenses, which were released in 1974 with the Pro S, and the more improved multi-coated KL lenses that accompanied the release of the Pro SD in 1990. And released at the same time were the L series lenses, of which I think there are only 2. And here's the breakdown on compatibility. The original and C series lenses fit either the original RB67 Pro and the Pro S. The KL series lenses fit the later Pro SD, which has the larger lens mount. But there is a ring adapter around the base of these KL lenses which can be removed so that they'll fit the smaller mounts on the Pro and the Pro S bodies. So the KL lenses are going to be the most recent and improved of what's out there. And then, like I said, there are only 2 lenses in the L series, a 75mm shift lens and a 500mm super telephoto. Those are only compatible with the Pro SD from 1990. Now, in that massive lineup of lenses, there was only one macro offering, a 140mm 4.5. But the beauty of the RB67 system is that it uses bellows focusing. So getting close up is possible with any of these lenses, really. So let's go over the basic functions of the RB. The shutter is in the lens, so you'll set the shutter speed here. And the aperture on the ring right behind it. Speeds are 1 second, to 1/400th of a second plus T. The aperture is selected using the very next ring, and right behind that is the PC connection for flash. Toward the bottom of the lens on the front, you have the stop down lever so you can check depth of field. Focusing is accomplished using either of the two knobs on the side. And if you're going to take advantage of the bellows focusing to extend the lens way out to get close up, you'll need to refer to this extension compensation chart to adjust your exposure. Because the further out a lens is extended, the less light makes it to the film plane. So adjustments are necessary. So let's take a look at how this works. Let's say we have the 127mm lens focused on our subject. And let's say that that subject is 1.5 meters away. If we look at the compensation scale, the 127mm lens is indicated by the fourth green curve. Take note where that curve intersects the distance scale, and notice that there is a gray block underneath the 127mm lens curve at that distance. That gray block lets us know that at that distance and with that lens, we'll need to add half a stop to the exposure. Now, using that scale might seem a little confusing at first, but it's easy to get a feel for it. And the main thing that you'll need to teach yourself to do is to take a look at the distance scale after you've focused to see if any compensation needs to be made. The shutter release is here on the front, and it has a rotating collar where you can lock it. Once you've made an exposure, there are 2 steps to get the camera ready for the next shot. First, you'll need to cock the shutter with this lever. Then you'll need to wind the film back. And finally, if you need to rotate the back between horizontal and vertical orientations, just grab the back and twist. And finally, if you need to change the orientation from horizontal to vertical, just grab the back and twist. To sum it up for the RB67 system, I'd say it's incredibly flexible with tons of accessories that have been proven out over decades of professional use. Now let's turn our attention to this, the RZ67. It's not incredibly different from the RB, but the major difference is that where the RB is fully mechanical, the RZ is electronic, and that leads to some changes. First off, the shutter speeds are controlled by a dial on the left side of the body and not the lens, and the range is from 1/400th of a second all the way to 8 seconds plus B. The aperture is still controlled by a ring on the lens, where you'll also find a PC socket. And just like the RB lenses, the RZ lenses also have a stop-down lever on the bottom. And the distance exposure compensation scale is just like it is on the RB. One improvement the RZ does make is that the shutter reset and film wind is now included in the same step. So after an exposure, all you need to do to prepare for the next shot is one press of the lever. Right above the lever is also something new. There's a little switch that reads M on one side and R on the other, with another mark in between both. That in between mark is where you'll keep the camera set for normal use. If you want to rotate the back, you'll need to set it to R and set it back to normal once you've done that. The M setting is for multiple exposures. Now, this is the first time I've ever had the opportunity to shoot with either of these cameras. But here are a few of my favorite shots from the first couple of rolls. Now, even though I can't claim that I'm anywhere near fluent with these cameras, I do have some initial thoughts about the pros and cons of these. So let's start with the pros. First off, the 6x7 format. It's designed to help you take advantage of the entire negative without significant cropping. Next is the ability for any of the lenses to shoot close-ups due to the bellows focusing. You just need to familiarize yourself with the way it works. The more you use it, the more second nature it'll become. The next couple of points go to the RB67. One, there is a large selection of lenses. The RB was sold from 1970 until 2010, I believe. And there were several generations of lenses. The only thing to keep in mind is that with the RB67 Pro SD, the lens mount is larger. So using an older lens may require an adapter, but they'll function just fine. The second point goes specifically to the RB67 Pro SD. It can also fit a 6x8 back if you were ever in the need of such. Another point to the RB series is that it's fully mechanical, and as these cameras age, that will probably become more and more of a benefit. Now, pros for the RZ. Along with the format and close focusing features of the RB, it has the additional benefit of an extended shutter speed range due to it being electronic, and it has a simplified advance method. Now the cons. The top shutter speed on all of the lenses is 1/400th of a second. I don't know if that's too much of an issue, but it's something to be aware of. Secondly, these are big, heavy cameras, so they're not well suited for a lot of handheld work. They're also going to need a sturdy tripod to keep them steady. Another con is that the lenses aren't particularly fast. The largest aperture on any of the RB lenses is 3.8. And the same goes for the RZ lenses, with one single exception of a lens that offers 2.8. Now, if I'm wrong about this, please let me know in the comments. Now, how do these stack up against the other two 6x7 SLRs? Well, the Mamiyas have a closer focusing capability and much faster flash sync than the Pentax 6x7. But the Pentax has faster lenses, several going to 2.8 and one going to 2.4. But the ability to use interchangeable film backs also beats out the Pentax. As for the Bronica GS1, well, it uses leaf shutter lenses too, but they use a different shutter that allows for 1/500th of a second. It's also smaller than the Mamiyas since it doesn't use a revolving back. But because of that, you really need to add an eye-level prism and maybe even a right hand grip to assist with having to turn the camera for vertical shooting. Another plus for the Bronica is that the lenses are a bit faster, 3.5 apertures versus 3.8. And it also allows for TTL flash, which was quite unique when it came out in the early 1980s. When you consider everything though, it's evident that none of these 6x7 SLRs are the perfect solution. Each has its strengths and weaknesses, and what's best will ultimately depend on how you intend to use them. So what are your experiences with either the RB or the RZ, or the Pentax 67 or Bronica GS1 for that matter? Let me know in the comments. I'll always learn a lot from what y'all add, so I do appreciate all the feedback. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing. I have tons of cameras still in the queue, so you don't want to miss that. I also want to give a huge shout out to Russ Young for hooking me up with these beasts for a review. So thank you, Russ. And I'll see you next time.